Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to our today's webinar, the first one in 2017. My colleague Stefan and I welcome you to this webinar named by Processors, Performance and Possibilities, Easily Analyze Oracle Applications. Before we start with our webinar, I would like to introduce you to the tool you're using, which means during this webinar you are in listen-only modus. And you can use the chat functionality or raise your hand functionality to get in contact with us. It is nearly at the bottom of the toolbar you see on the right side of your window. And if there are any questions left, like you can't hear us or your screen is squeezed or something like that, just give us a sign or a short message, and during this webinar, you also have the possibility to post your questions towards the theme in the chat box, and we will answer it after Stefan's technical part. So before Stefan starts with this amazing process analysis, I would like to introduce to some of you our company, because some participants or some of you actually do not know what we are doing, and thank you so much for being here. First of all, my colleague Stefan is our business development manager at PITS. He's got a very long experience with Forms, ADF, going mobile and process analysis, so he's very firm and feel comfortable with today's theme. My name is Doreen. I'm responsible for customer service at PITS GmbH, and I'm your today's moderator. So just a couple of seconds and you will hear Stefan with his themes. About us. Some of you may know us, so a warm welcome to our customers. We have 4 locations, 2 in Germany with a headquarter in Stuttgart, south of Germany, and a location in the north of Germany. We've got our PITS LLC in the US, Michigan, Detroit, and one in the UK located near London. Since 1999, our founders and co-founders developed PITSCon and established a very good functionality. And with more than 80 colleagues all over the world in different countries located, we have very competent and highly experienced employees, which means they started Forms from Forms 2 or ADF from the very first beginning, or IPX when it was named like HTML or something like that. So they are very professional and very well experienced. We've got over 500 satisfied customers in over 40 countries, which means from Sri Lanka to Denmark to USA, Mexico, Brazil, of course Germany, Africa, around the whole world, and we love to serve you with our services all over. We are 100% Oracle partner, which means we support not only with our tool, also with our service every Oracle product you have or you would like to have or you would like to deal with or you're already working with. And of course, we've got one tool, PITSCon. A few of you already know it and are familiar with it, have good experience or made good experience with it. And it's our tool, PITSCon for Converter, for high performance Oracle application, which means to migrate, to analyze. Stefan will come to this point later, and to search and replace, to do quite a lot of stuff you would do normally manually, and you can do it now just by 1 or 2 clicks. A few of you already know this. There are a lot of focuses, so to say, and as I mentioned before, for more than 22 years we've got experience with Forms from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12C, of course, and we already are very feeling comfortable with SOA. We've got a profound knowledge about web services, business process management, and WebLogic server, and so on. And more than 8 to 10 years experience with ADF. We've got a couple of very successful ADF projects all over the world, and they're still running very well. And we had, for example, in Germany, a huge automotive company where we developed a special program for the scanners and handhelds, and that's something we are very proud of. So our experience with mobile are pretty good. And before we come to Stefan's part, I would like to show you all our customers from different areas and branded, and from insurances to logistics to food deliverer, or to have kids playing and all these stuff around. And up to this point, thank you very much to all our customers who support us so very well. And I guess I would like to hand over to Stefan to give you guys the opportunity to see what processes, performance, and possibilities you got when you easily analyze Oracle applications, which means about technical and business knowledge, departments' requirements, how to know whether to invest in new technologies or expand the existing application. So you'll get a very profound inside view of what we mean when we're talking about process analysis. Stefan, are you ready for your part? Okay, then I change the moderation rights. Just a second, please. Yep. And enjoy.
Okay. So, could you see my presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and a very warm welcome from my side. I'm a little bit excited because I have the possibility to present you the, in my opinion, famous last feature from the latest PITSCon release. And with this, we are able to step over the bridge from the data and source code to process mining functionalities. Process mining is mentioned the last 2 or 3 years as the replacement, more or less, for data mining. So not only focus on data to understand the behavior of your company, but more or less and identify the underlying processes and identify where are the strongest one and where are the weakest one, which of your processes perform very well, and where could you improve or perhaps move to other technologies. And we try to figure this gap, and as you may know, PITS is very familiar with parsing source code and understand each and every lines of codes inside your forms, reports, and database application. But how could we now in the near future, or right now with the actual release, measure your process performance? And that's what we try to figure out in the next slides, and I give you some example of results from our actual projects and analyses. So first of all, if you know PITSCon, we are able to load every actual artifact from your application, rather if it's a forms module or reports module or the database object, into our own repository and pass all dependencies and lines of codes and understood each and every bit and byte. What we do is to try to record the behavior with these application. We try to inject these applications with some tracker information. So each and every PLSQL block will get some log entries for our repository, so that we later on could identify how the process works or is implemented inside your application. Your forms application itself is a couple of functionalities, but it's not visible or not implemented how these parts work together and gets to a living application while the user is using it. So on top of that, we identify a free keystroke combination inside your application so that you can use the record functionality like an old tape recorder. So press a key combination to start the recording process and press the same key combination to stop it. Afterwards, all these data come back into the PitsCon repository, and we are able to make some very fancy analytics and some process mining features. So in a technical perspective, how could this look like? So that's a usual trigger. You may implement it inside your application. And whenever you see a line with the beginning of the package called PC key record, you see that is an injection from our PitsCon functionality to track those lines, to track the situation that the PLSQL interpreter will touch these lines. That could be at the beginning of the functionality, at the end of the procedure, whenever you have an exception, or whenever there is a markup to mark these specific line. And with the PitsCon functionality, it doesn't matter if this is only one module with 2 triggers, or if it's a very huge application with 500 modules and thousands of triggers. We do it at once with a batch program, with a batch script to inject those. Whenever you like to have those in your procedure, we can configure that out. What you don't see over here, but it's in the latest release, we not only trigger the occurrence of the line of code, we also log and save the parameter for function, procedures, and statements going to the database. So we could later on, as a more or less side effect of those, identify how we could set up something like unit tests. But more than that, for that later on. For your application, we provide 2 new modules. They are getting attached to your original application, and that is coming up when your user press the record functionality. He is able to add some metadata to the process. So we have a name of the process, a description, and for more or less a migration approach or for a complete refactoring of your application, we identify on top an owner and a scope. The owner is necessary to see if you have later on security issues, and you will see in your new world that specific processes are only allowed for specific groups of users. So we can identify those processes by bounding them together on the owner attribute. And the scope could be an architectural advice to put them in a common bucket. For think about, you have some processes to make them mobile later on. So you can mark them with the scope mobile. So in the migration process, we could identify these processes to be web services or functionalities for something like mobile cloud services or so on. Okay, beside the decided or dedicated recording, we have an additional feature called silent recording. On top, we are able to allow the record functionality in the backend to track all information, rather if the user is starting or not starting the dedicated process. So we have a complete log for the complete application on a day or two, how long you like to run those silent recording, and we can compare the results of those tracking together with the dedicated recording later on. Usually that is a situation where the work council come on to the table, and we hand over all results to the work council usually, so they could see there is no user data stored to that session. In the silent recording, we have a random number for each session, and the user story starts when the users log into the database, but the login information are not stored. So we can show and hand over all these raw data to the work council so that no doubt comes up to storing user data. So at the end, if all these information are tracked, we get them back to PitsCon in our repository, and we are able to insert the user stories or the use cases or the process you like to name it, and they are bound together with a couple of metadata we stored inside the PitsCon repository to each and every unit, like source code, analytics values like maintainable index or cyclomatic complexity and the number of statements, and not only the time the user story needs. So let me switch to a very quick demonstration how to set up those functionalities. And after that, we come back to the slide deck with the results and the arguments for the results. So we move to PitsCon. That's the not the very last functionality. Oh, sorry, not the very last functionality, but it's the PitsCon release with the functionality for process mining. The first step you have to take is pass your application. You load all your forms module, reports, and database object into PitsCon, and afterwards you can inject the tracker information. And you can decide if you want to track only forms modules or specific forms modules or reports or menus or even database objects. So if you not only have functionalities on front-end side, but also on back-end side to track, to analyze, you can do that with packages, functions, procedures, and table triggers inside the database. The naming convention is hand over to you, so we'll give you the source code for the packages to lock each story. They will be compiled into your database, and the naming convention said, okay, what call do we need inside the forms modules to store these tracking information in the PitsCon table. So you can run the task, the application will get injected, and you can deploy that on your Q&A system or in your production environment, wherever you want. So what's going on? Let's see how that works. We have a very simple, and I think everybody knows this application from the Oracle Forms demo system. It's the Summit sample, and we inject all these components inside the Summit example, and we identify a specific combination which is free to start our recording process. So usually the key user will navigate in your application to those parts, to those menu, to those starting forms module where the process usually begins. So let's assume we are here, and I now press the key combination to start recording the user story. You see there's a couple of user stories already started or stored. We add a new one, and we give it a name for it, webinar, Jan, life, whatever you want. It's the owner, the presenter in this case, and the scope is only demo. So with this information, we save the user story, wonderful, and we see it's marked as red. So we see that's a running user story right now. We could now leave that forms module and go exactly back to those part in the application. We start and press the key combination. We now usually work inside the application and do our process, whatever we like to do. So perhaps we may change some stock values while we made a mistake, save those, made an exit over here, get a feedback from the menu and say, yes, I'd like to save this transaction. Perhaps I'd like to switch to another one and change over here, have an exit, leave the form, save the changes, whatever you want. And at the end, you're saying, okay, that's a process I do. That is a specific process I do day by day, and I now recorded it inside my application. I'm finished. So I press the key combination once more. You see my process is still running, and that is what you see is a multi-user functionality. You can record user stories in parallel through different users. So the other users will see my user story, but they are not able to cancel or save or edit those. I'm the only one who could do that. So I could save my story, and I'm finished over here. Okay, I'll leave the application and go back to my PitsCon installation. So we start PitsCon once more. What I now do is the results of those tracker information are stored right now inside PitsCon relevant tables, perhaps in your specific environment. So we hand over those tables that are only 2 tables back into an environment where PitsCon is able to load these data. That's what we do next. So we manage the user story, we start it, and we like to import a user story. And what you see over here, all those are gray, but one is a white background. That's a ready to import user story, and we can do that. Okay, we mark them and say, please import these user story. It's successfully done. Okay, wonderful. I'm finished with that. And in the list of my user stories, over on top, I see a new user story arrived. It's a detailed, tracked user story with 1 minute and 30 seconds, near about 1 minute 30 seconds to take. And underneath, I see each and every trigger who's touched during my user stories. And we combine those units with some metadata out of PitsCon. So we know these black marked are very hard to maintainable triggers, and we could later on see how is the possibility to improve them. Okay, that's it so far from the PitsCon side. You see it's able and very easy to start a user story, to stop them, and to insert all those data back into the PitsCon repository. And now we could imagine what is possible on top of these data to analyze those in specific viewpoints or viewports. We could split them down in more or less 4 big buckets. Let me start with the application refactoring. With the process view of the application, we have totally different possibilities to set up a refactoring or a migration to other technologies. So we can, in a process manner, start into a new world like ADF, open source Java, .NET, and take focus on the process, not only on the data model or UI. No, the process is stand in the middle, and that is a combining factor between the legacy application and your new, perhaps in the new architecture world, living application, because the process is still existing in your departments. As I said, more or less as a side effect, we generate all those data which is necessary for unit test on database and form side. We see later on the slide, so I can go more in detail to that. Performance tuning is also a big part of the analyze, because we know, in fact, how long does a user story take, how long does each unit take. So we have a couple of very nice analytics after that. But the main point, I think the very interesting point, is a very good process understanding and a very good starting point for process mining. Later on you will see more. So let me start with the first analyze, and we do it from the very simple one to the most complex one. And the very simple one is just taking care about the source code. So as you may know, PitsCon is able to identify unused code in the static analysis. So whenever there's a program unit and we identify the unit is never ever called, rather from a trigger, nor from a unit, nor from a keystroke event or whatever, we know that it's unused. And that is the amount of red underneath in these rectangle of source code. On the other hand, you see 2 different ways of mark a unit. Either you can mark through a dedicated recording, so the unit is touched by a dedicated recording process, or it's marked through a silent recording. So we have blue for the dedicated recording, yellow for the silent recording. In that case, you see, oh, there are only a few units touched by dedicated, but more of them through silent recording. The green in the middle is the intersection of those 2 groups, and it's called a perfect unit because we know it belongs to a couple of dedicated recording user processes, and it's used in the real world, in the real life of your application. So it's perfect. But the most of interest lies underneath in the white space, because that is a couple of units you have implemented in your application, but it's never touched rather through dedicated recording, nor through a silent recording. So you can go back to your key users, and that is PitsCon very good for, because we provide you with a visual tool to let the user know, it starts more or less with buttons. These buttons are not pressed. What's going on? Do you miss it in the user story, in the process recording, and your user doesn't touch them? What is going on? Could we delete these functionalities? It's no longer used. Or do you make a mistake? Do you forgot them? And that is a canvas out of a real existing project we done last year. There are a couple of elements we could throw away through the refactoring because they are never ever used, but nobody really recognized that. Okay, so that is the first step. So compare silent recording, existing code, and dedicated recording. If we now try to bring the number of users into the game, we have a very interesting additional functionality. That is the so-called 1090-90 analyze. The underlying statement is that only 10% of your application is used by 90% of the users in 90% of the working day. So what does it mean? If you could identify those part of your application, that are the brilliant diamonds, that are the most worthful source code in your application, because it's very often used for many, many different users. So that is what we figure out in this graph. It's a bubble chart with two axes. On the x-axis, we see the number of users used, number of different users use this program unit. The more right the bubble is, the more different users are used with the unit. And on the y-axis, we see the real usage of the application. How often is it called inside the different user stories? So you see perhaps on the upper right edge of this diagram a small bubble marked with the number 10. That is a behavior for a typical login dialog. It's used by many, many users, but only once in a session. So you see that is usually a login dialog. The most of interest are the three bubbles on top. You see the number 39 is usually used by 35 users. That's around about 80% in very, very, very often. So that is a unit with high focus, with high potential. The size of the bubble gives you the information of the complexity of the application. If it's a very, very big bubble, it's very hard to maintain, it's very complex. And that is the reason to bring up the next graph into the presentation. That is a so-called risk analyze. With our functionalities from source code analytics, we are able to decide how complex to maintain a specific unit is. That is more or less very academic calculation on source code. It's not belonging to PLSQL or Oracle or PITS. It's a standard metric, a standard mathematical calculation on the maintainable index. The higher the index is, the more complex to maintain the application is. So in these analyze, you see the frequent of use, how often a unit is used, and the complex of the maintainable index on the two axes. So focus on the upper right quadrant, because all dots inside the upper right quadrant are units which are very, very often but hard to maintain. So try to improve them. Try to bring them in lower and more left side quadrants to have a very easy to maintain application. So what we can do next is a specific point out of the error handling. We see maintainable index. Okay, what should I care on this? Yes, you should care if you have some errors. Whenever your application or your unit traps in an error, you have to take care about that. So here in silent recording and process recording, we remember or remark every unit who's trapping into an error. And so that is what we like to present on this slide. You see underneath the units, and the size of the blue bar is the time a unit is called, how often is it called. And it's not very surprising that the when you form instance trigger is very on the top, because it's every time fired when you enter the form. So it's not very unusual to have them on the very left side. But more of interest are the orange bar parts, because that is the number of errors inside those triggers. So you see that when you form instance trigger over here in that specific project has only very, very rare a number of errors, but when tab page changed is with a very high part of errors. So that could be of interest. Why is it that case? Do you try to handle a constraint like a duplicate value on index that's more or less a usual behavior for an exception, or is it more or less a when others and a very ugly failure handling? Okay, so, but to bring more information to the overall application, we try to figure out what is the so-called hotspots inside my application. So what we do in the last project I'm involved is for 3 days, we have the silent recording running for 3 days, and we measure how often a specific unit is used and from how many different users there are used. So that is what we try to figure out in this diagram. The orange bar is the number of totally used units. So we see that the disable opal is a very frequent unit, and it's used from 52% of the users. So from very, very, I think more than a half, and very interesting group of users. So it's not a rare unit. It's often in different user stories. So that unit is, in my case or in our case, very risky to change because it's very often used and used by different users. So if you made a mistake, that it could be getting in trouble. But if you make an improvement, you will be the king. So that is what we can try to distinguish the units in hotspots or rare units. Now it's time to get the performance into. What we till now see is only the number of usage. How often does we call a unit, from which different users we are calling, but no information about the duration of the unit. And that's what's coming up over here. So we see that when you form instance triggers, not only touched very, very often, you consume a lot of time. So that's why he's very on the left side in this graph. So if you improve the first 2 units, you can have an improvement of your overall application. And that is no matter if it's a unit inside forms or in a PLL or in the database, we put all those different kind of buckets of PL/SQL code together in one graph. On the other way of make them visible is have an average time of usage. So the graph before is an overall sum of time consumed by the unit. If you like to more the average time, we can have that graph too. So when you form instance triggers once more, very, very often inside or on top of these analytics, that means he's very often called, but one run is very long. So it's a combination of 2 things. But we see the program unit, Personenadressen it's called, it's a German application, so sorry for the naming, is on rank number 2, but it's not very often used. Otherwise, we have seen him in the slide before. But itself, one running through that unit takes a lot of time. So you have different perspectives on the performance. On one hand, on the overall time consumed and the average time. But now it's time to step into the analyze for the process. What does a process now mean? So as you see, we combine the chain of different units as a process because it's marked with the beginning and marked with the end. So the user determines how long a specific process is, how many different subparts are belonging to a process, but that is a pattern. And with a pattern inside our environment, our repository, we can try to identify those patterns on different places. Do we use or do we have or do we identify those patterns in other forms modules too? Could that be a very similar process in that case? Or are other processes possibility with our implementation? So that is a very more or less data mining functionality on the chain of units. And that's what we call, or what's called process mining. And that allows a couple of functionalities we write down over here. You can read them later on, or follow the next slide. We can first of all measure the process performance itself. So what you see is, as you see my insert into the PitsCon repository, we have stored the duration of the complete process. No matter if I'm too slow as a user and waiting and have a lot of wait time, I have to think about the entries, I have to read some sheet of papers to see what to insert in the program. So there is user time on one hand, but also process time on the other hand. And we could make them visible and give them some numbers and measurements. And that's what showing in the chart underneath is we can split down the time the process need either on the bucket is the time used by the program units, by the trigger, or on the database side. If the database side is very big, we can think about improvements on database side. If the form side is very big in time consumption, we can think about, does it make sense to improve the performance while we move PLSQL logic to database because the database is faster? So we can have thought about different kind of improvements on the database. So once more, we can also make them visible in a bar graph with two colors. The blue one represents the usage of the program time, and the orange one represents the time the user needs to fulfill the process. So you get a totally different viewpoint on your processes. Is that very user-consuming process, so we can split them down or provide those information easier for the user, or is the user very fast in and wait a lot of time for the computer to react and bring back the relevant information. So that is very helpful to identify over here. What we also provide as a result out of the process recording is a very cool feature for visualization the complete process. So we know which part are belonging to a specific process, and we can make them visible as a dependency graph, as a flow chart. And that could made marked in different colors. You only see that here over here in the slide black and white, sorry for that. But we colored the nodes inside with one color for the database side, one color for the library size, one color for the form size. So in the flowchart you can identify which part is injected or which part of my architecture is responsible for that specific process. And that is a very good starting point for moving those processes into another infrastructure. If you think about moving a process to a mobile device or make them available in a cloud service, or you think about, hey, that could be a very cool microservice to provide them for other departments too, you can see what are the components which are part of my process, and what should I do to export them into a new architecture. With a little bit more business intelligence in mind, we now have two very large containers of chains, of process change, one from the dedicated resourcing and one from the silent recording. And with pattern matching, you can identify what are the usual processes took place during the day. So if you mark a specific income of an article as a process and you identify that pattern, you could match them to silent recording and see, oh, how often does a process income an article took place today and what is going on. And for the silent recording, it's not necessary to mark the beginning or the ending. You know it through the pattern of your recorded process. And that is a very fancy feature to identify processes and how often they took place. Are there some behaviors during the day, or is it a matter of Monday or Tuesday, or whatever. So you can compare a lot of features. more or less as a side effect we see in modernization project, it's helpful to start a migration or modernization no longer based on artifacts in the source code, but rather than on processes. That is a very, very deep inside information of your application. And to coordinate those, it's very easy for PitsCon to export them to some project management software systems like Trello or Jira or whatever. We do it here in the screenshot you see. We generate a Trello card for every process so that the user and the software development team can later on work on that specific process. That is a good idea if we talk about reorganization and modernization, because a lot of you are what is going on in the actual philosophy of software development is talking about microservices. So microservices are responsible from the UI till the backend for a couple of specific processes. But stop, what we do is we record processes, and we know which part are belonging to a couple of processes. So we know the content of a needed microservice. And that's what we start with Oracle Forms. You know, if you are a user of PitsCon, we are able to delete unused objects. That's very easy. So we kick them out of an existing Forms application if we identify that block is never ever used. What we now are able to do with the silent recording, we are able to refactor your Forms module to split them in different kind of microservices. Identify from this UI components over the canvases, the windows, the blocks, the buttons, where you identify everything is participating your specific processes. So if you mark 2, 3, or 4 processes and call PitsCon, please make out of this a specific Forms module that could be ease your architecture and could be a very, very good starting point for a step into the open source world, a step in .NET, step in ADF, whatever you like to go. That is a very fancy feature. But how could you identify candidates for that? Oh, there's a graph available. It's a refactoring advice coming out of PitsCon. So once more, it's a quadrant, and on the x-axis, you see the frequent of use of Forms modules. We are no longer talking about units, we're talking about Forms modules. So it's a very big module. And on the y-axis, you see in how many different subparts we could split down the module based on the processes. So the number 9 over there in the top right quadrant is a good candidate for split them down into different user stories, into different modules to fulfill those specific processes. As I said in the beginning, we have one information on top beneath all these very helpful analytics. We are able to generate data out of the unit tests. So what we are doing is, while recording the user stories either in silent recording and in dedicated recording, is that we store all parameters and for programs and functions inside Forms and database. So we know what are units to test and what are the input values for those units to test. And with this, we could set up very easily test suites like for the SQL developer. That is very, very easy to set up. The only thing you can or you have to take care about is the results you expect from those tests, and you have set up a complete unit test very easy, very fast. What we also just having as a proof of concept, but not yet implemented in the latest release, is setting up scripts for Oracle Application Testing Suite. So you record your user stories, or having even a silent recording running for a day or two, and with this information we can support your Oracle Application Testing Suite to allow automatic testing of your Forms application. We have a couple of projects with all these information in the last year, a couple of analyzers, and we often come to an end that we see that users are not willing or not allowed to have all these functionalities running in the production environment. Okay, no matter, we could understood that, but there is very helpful features for all these user stories and process mining also in a Q&A environment. Beneath all these information we see, we have 2 points very helpful identified in a project for a Q&A. The first one is backtracking. In the Q&A, usually you have a key user testing some new functionalities, and sometimes he failed and trap into an error and set up a message or set up your backtracking system with all necessary information. But what we can now enhance is the user can record these behavior to a bug. He can record the bug with PitsCon. He press a combination to start the recording, stop it after the bug is hit, and the developer could get all necessary information, the flow of the units, the parameters of the values for the procedures and functions inside the PitsCon repository. It is very, very easy to reproduce and solve the bug. So that's very, very helpful. On the other hand, the developer can more or less take care on the users if they prove complete changes for the next release. Once more, imagine you have deployed a new release in your Q&A environment and hand over the access to your test user group. And at the end of the day or the week, the test users say, oh, we've done everything is okay, we covered all, and everything works fine. But with PitsCon underneath, you can now check and prove the complete code coverage. Is every line you change, every unit you change, really touched by a test, or is something missing? Is a test missing, even if you have handmade tests from your test users? That is very helpful features, especially coming up for a Q&A environment. For the production environment, usually we have no problem to have the silent recording running, but in a couple of companies, they said, oh no, we are not happy to have a silent recording on the production environment. We like to reduce it only to dedicated recording. No matter, no problem, works fine. The only 2 graphs you're missing is the 1090/90, because we don't know how many users are used these parts in your application, and a couple of information over the overall performance are missing. The performance is reduced only to the dedicated recording. For that, we give you all the information, but some units may miss because they are not part of the dedicated recording. So that's it, and I hope you find a lot of fancy features inside these analytics that with a very, very low invest, you are able to get a wonderful process mining view on your existing forms, reports, PLSQL-based application. And I now like to hand over back to Doreen for the roundup and perhaps for a couple of questions. Doreen, are you out there? I hope she's out there, but not speaking right now. Otherwise, I try to stay in the line for some seconds. Doreen? Perhaps you had some problems with the audio. I tried to hand over the presentation to her and see what's going on. Okay, somebody out there, but I could not hear you. Louis, I'm not able to hear you. Okay. I see that a couple of questions coming up. Yes, the story or the webinar is still recording. That could I say right now rather than Doreen try to set up her voice system. We record these webinars, so if you like to come back next week.
Hello.
Oh, Doreen, you're out there.
Hey.
Yeah,
Okay,
perfect,
finally.
wonderful.
I made it. Great. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Well, Stefan, I guess we can continue with the questions, and afterwards I would like to make a roundup concerning our offer. So I guess there are a couple of questions I've seen, and I try to I tried to say something, but it wasn't possible. I had some difficulties with my headset. I'm pretty sorry for circumstances. So, as far as I know from the questions, and I didn't say it at the beginning, this webinar is recorded, and you will have free access to it on our YouTube channel, which will be somewhere around the end of next week. We have to prepare it a little bit and maybe cut myself out and stuff like this to shorten it up a bit. So, any technical questions so far? No. Stefan, opening chat box, I can't find any technical questions.
No technical questions so far. If there is any technical question raise up, don't hesitate. Feel free to get in contact with me. I'd like to step into a discussion and try to explain you everything as necessary. But I think, Doreen, you will have some run-up words. So
Yeah,
I mute myself.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. We had this webinar this morning in the German version, which was very nice. Thank you so much for supporting me the whole day, so to say. And it was a pleasure listening to you speaking English, so to say. Very nice, thank you. Just to round it up, ladies and gentlemen, of course we've got a special offer concerning process analysis, which means, as Stefan already pointed out, just let me summarize it up. We record, determine, process, and monitor the user behavior, which means instead of considering only source code, it makes a lot more sense to look at the process, and that should support the application. So what we are doing, or what is part of the offer, is we are taking your sources, expand the application with tracker information, give it back to you, and then you record the user behavior, the whole process, for a determined time frame. And as Stefan already pointed out, it's about silent recording, if you would prefer this. And then we analyze, afterwards we'll made our analyze concerning different part of it, like the 10, 90, 90 percentage Stefan mentioned, performance, risk analysis. We take a look at the data governance, refactoring, all the stuff we mentioned before. And at the end there will be a presentation with what we supposed you to do, the experience we gain through processes from our experience, to say, okay, we would suggest to do it this way or the other way. So that is how we can support you, and we find out where there are parts that do not fit in the process so appropriate, that had to be changed, and so on. If you are interested in this part of the analysis, you have you can contact, of course, my colleagues, which are in PITS America under info@pitsamerica.com, or at PITS UK, sales.uk@pits.com. And I know my colleague Yasa from UK is with us, so he will love to hear you and support you with any further offer and any further questions concerning how you get this offer and what is all included. And if there are any other technical questions you got, just keep in contact with us under customer service at pits.de or slaroca@pits.com. And so up to my side, Stefan, that's all I could present to sum up your lovely technical part. Thank you so much. And
thank you very much for attending and giving a very warm welcome roundup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a nice day and evening, and enjoy your time, and hope to see you soon with our next webinar in February. Please stay with us in contact and get on our homepage, follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn or YouTube. And if there are any questions left, please contact us. We're looking forward to hear you. Thank you so much.